Kirsten, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast.
Yeah, sure. It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
It's my pleasure. Well, congratulations for winning the Golden Globe race. What an amazing accomplishment.
Yeah, thank you. It was a good adventure.
I'm sure it was. And it's been what, over a year now, and you're still doing interviews and getting awards. It must be just a nonstop media blitz.
It is, but it's all been really positive, so one can but be grateful for it.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so let's talk a little bit about the race. When I think you told me before that you started with the intention to win, but that was going to be one of my questions. Or did you initially uh, hope to win the race?
I did, and that was in the back of my mind all throughout the preparation. So it wasn't a matter of buying a boat that was at an affordable rate on my doorstep or whatever the case may be. It was really from the word go, going out and seeking what I believed could win, and then doing whatever it took to get the boat to such a point that it was in a state that it could compete.
And what was it about the Cape George 36 that made you think it was the boat that was going to win the race?
Well, it's got the longest water line, which is obviously a huge plus for speed. It's a heavy boat, which in my opinion was a good formula for having a boat that's stable in the Southern Ocean and that might be very, very strong in the way that it's been built. So obviously to win the race, you have to survive the race. It's got a very tall mast, which kind of made me think its capacity to carry a lot of sail would make up for its heavy weight. And there were other features about it, like its bowsprit that I really loved. You can fly all sorts of different sails with the bowsprit. And it had a reputation for being able to track really well, which is obviously good if you're fully reliant on just a wind vane for self-steering.
Hmm.
So
And did the
those were
boat
some of the key features.
and did the boat live up to all your expectations?
It definitely did. I wouldn't have chosen a different boat. I was very happy with my choice.
Very good. Yeah, I think there's at least one entrant in the next Golden Globe race that's using a Cape George 36.
Yeah, it'll be fun. Maybe there'll be even more than one, and then they can have a little mini Cape George race amongst themselves.
Yep. Uh, did you keep Minnehaha or did you sell her?
I still have her at this stage. Yeah.
Okay, so sounds like you're still up in the air about that.
Yeah, I'm still a little up in the air about it. I might have to sell her, but I might also find a way not to sell her. So
Have you sailed her since the race?
I have. I sailed her from Les Sables d'Olonne down to Spain, and then from Spain over to Madeira, and that's it
Okay.
for now.
Okay. At what point during the race did you think that, or did you start to realize that you might win?
Well, I knew that I had been the first to pass Cape Horn because the lighthouse keeper told me when I spoke to him on VHF. But then, of course, I got stuck in the doldrums. So after that, I didn't really think I had much hope anymore. So after that, I didn't really think I could win. But I certainly decided to keep pushing as hard as I could in case I still had a bit of a chance of winning. So I didn't really know that I was going to win until I got becalmed, a few miles off Les Sables d'Olonne, and someone actually told me.
Oh, okay. So you were almost at Les Sables d'Olonne when you found out that you were going to win.
Yeah, pretty much. So up until that point, I had no idea. I thought, it's quite possible that I'd not come in first anymore.
Hmm. Can you talk about some of the ways that you maximized boat speed?
You mean in refit or while actually sailing?
Um, well, whatever comes to mind, really. I was thinking about while sailing, but if there's something specific about during the refit, that would be. I'm looking
Well,
for
I
ways
guess
that.
during the refit, one of the key questions was how to and which anti-fouling to apply so that it would give a really smooth finish, and that hopefully it would prevent to a large degree the growth of barnacles. So that was one of the big questions. And I mean, there were certainly other questions like which sail combination to use, what of the things that were permitted or even compulsory could you use in your favor, like having two Spinnaker poles. What sail combination could you use using both poles, seeing as it was a rule to carry two poles. So, I mean, there were lots of little thoughts behind that and speed. And then while actually sailing, I mean, it was always a question of getting the right sails out, doing a sail change at the right moment, trimming the sails wherever possible, just to keep the boat speed up.
And can you tell us about how or when and in what conditions you used 2 spinnaker poles?
I used that quite a lot running downwind with strong winds, where it was quite a favorable thing to do because you could furl both of those sails that were in effect one sail because they were stitched together on one furling system, all from the safety of the cockpit. So you could reef them down to quite a good point and still keep really good speeds with a very stable combination because they were high cut clue sails. So, it's not like the poles were ever dipping into the water or anything. So it turned out to be a better solution than sailing wing on wing, where you've got the boom often touching the water, especially in stronger conditions and heavier seas. So that worked really well.
So you're talking about using 2 Yankees, one on either side. Is that correct?
Yeah, they're like symmetrical Yankees. That's basically one sail because they've been stitched together. But you can either use them lying up against each other as one sail, only on one side of the boat. If you're not sailing wing on wing, but if you're sailing what would be otherwise wing on wing, you'd pole each out into its own direction.
Are they stitched together up at the luff, like by the luff tape?
Yeah, exactly. So you've got one rope bolt that goes into the foil groove, because if you had 2 separate sails and you put them into 2 separate grooves, you'd probably break your foil. But in this case, you've got one rope bolt going into one groove, so the pressure of the sails being split apart isn't being taken up by the foil; it's being taken up by the stitching.
Oh wow, that's great. Yeah, because I have 2 Yankees and I've thought about doing that, but I would be putting them in 2 foils. So you've got a better system.
I mean, if you had 2 foils, if you had 2 stays with separate foils, that's probably a really good system. It's probably slightly more efficient than my system. But the difference there is that you would have the second furled sail, even when you don't want it to be there, unless you took it down and flaked it, which is a bit of a mission. But otherwise, you've got that sausage there when you actually don't want it. And it is quite a lot of extra windage. So for me, it was, firstly, I didn't have a second forestay, to have a Solent sail or something like that. So for me, this seemed like a good compromise without having to change the rigging. And I also did like the fact that you wouldn't have that extra windage.
Yeah. I said 2 foils. I meant 2 grooves on one foil.
Oh, right, yeah.
But you said we would
Yeah,
split the
apparently I
foil
did speak to I spoke to some people and they said putting 2 different sails in different slots or grooves could potentially bend the foil. So
why do foils come with 2 grooves?
I'm not sure if it's to be able to do a quicker sail change, or if one is starting to get worn, you've still got the other one. I don't know, but apparently they're not made for actually having 2 sails in. But I stand to correction, but it did make sense that it could potentially put undue strain on the foil. So.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess you modified to you must have sewn 2 sails together, or you had a sailmaker do that for you.
Yeah, exactly. I had the sail built from the word go as a twin Yankee or whatever you want to call it, because that was actually one of the rules in the race, that if you have a sail that is stitched, if you have 2 sails that are stitched together as one, they would count as one sail, because of course you're limited to 10 sails in the race. So you have to be quite particular about which 10 sails you're going to use.
Wow, that sounds like a lot of sails. Can you sort of give us a list of all the sails you took?
Yeah, well, I had my 3 working sails, which was my main sail, my jib, and my stay sail. So those were obviously sails that would be on board. And then there was a storm's jib, which was compulsory. So that's already 4 sails down. I had a trisail, a storm trisail. So that's 5 sails. Then I had a symmetrical, I had an asymmetrical, I had a code 0. So that's already 8 sails. I had a second code 0 actually, because I had a delivery sail that just worked really well. So I decided to take that. And and then I had just a single Yankee, same as my double one. And I decided that last minute that I should maybe take a single one, and if for any reason I wanted to switch over to single. And I was very glad for that decision, because one of my Spinnaker poles broke, and when that happened, I did have to change the sails out.
Okay. So you said with your two Yankees sewn together, you can use them on sort of like as one sail with on one side of the boat where they're sort of doubled together. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. So if you're, if you're just reaching or beating or sailing, fetching, whatever, you can just use them as one sail. Then the one just lies on top of the other. So instead of being a really strong 8-ounce sail, which is usually what they'd make for a working jib, they'd use 2 4-ounce pieces of cloth. And the clews and everything are in exactly the same position when they're lying on top of each other. And if you're sailing them, if you're sailing with them out full, then it's fine. You technically only need one sheet. But when you're sailing, when you're reefing them, you need a second sheet on the inner clew, because the inner sail furls a little bit tighter than the outer sail. So the clews aren't completely aligned anymore. And the key is you want to keep the same tension on both of them, because if you have dissimilar tensions, then one of them is going to take more wear than the other.
Okay, so then you have to how do you manage that with the clue and with the sheet? Do you have two sheets coming off of two different clues going the same
Yeah,
direction?
exactly. What you actually have, because this was a very high cut Yankee, so you can't actually reach, when you unfurl it, you can't reach the clue because it's too high. So what you have is a strop, which in effect is just a piece of rope, but you've you would have spliced eyes into it. So each clue will have its own strop, and they'll be exactly the same length. And then you tie your sheet onto the eye on the end of the strop rather than onto the clue. That makes it reachable to you. And then so if you're sailing it as one, you'd just have both sheets tied through both clues or both strops from each clue. But if you're then furling, you need to tie a second sheet on. So you need you need 1 or 2 extra cars on your track, and then you need another winch that you can put the second sheet onto. And then it's actually quite all right. So I used to do that. I just have one sheet, the weather sheet and the working sheet. And then I just tie a third sheet, if you will. The one's a lazy sheet. I tie another working sheet onto the inner clue, and then I take it through a few extra cars on the track, and I'd bring it to its own winch.
Okay. Did you ever use your trisail?
I did use it, but I had an issue with my trisail track, and that is that the trisail jibed, and it ripped a couple of screws out of the track, and it bent the track slightly. So that meant I had to do a little repair in calmer conditions. And after that, I was a little bit worried to use the trisail track. So the trisail is great if you've got a strong track, but the nuisance about the trisail is that it takes a bit of time setting it up. So you can't really start doing it when you're into the 40 knots of wind, because it's difficult then to do it. So I'm wondering, if I did it again, if I wouldn't just scrap the trisail and rather have a 4th reef in my mainsail.
Yeah, that sounds easier. Speaking of reefing, how did you have your reefing set up? Was it slab reefing at the mast, or did you have lines coming back to the cockpit?
I just had slab reefing at the mast, and I'm not a fan of lines running back to the cockpit, because it's a lot of extra friction and a lot of extra line in the cockpit. And if anything gets jammed, you land up anyway having to go to the mast. So I think from the outset, let me just do everything at the mast, and I can see what's happening. I can regulate the tension, and my eyes are right there where everything's happening.
Mm-hmm. Do you always, when you reef, do you always tie the reef lines around the bunt of the sail, around the boom and the bunt of the sail? Or do you ever let that just hang loose?
No, I would tie the back, the aftmost reef line. I would tie right around the boom, just in case the reefing, the actual reefing line chafes through or something. Then at least there's still something holding that sail onto the boom. But all the others, I don't tie around the boom. I just tie them, through the eyes, and I had a loose-footed sail, and I think it's a bit better for the sail, because I think it doesn't stretch the sail out quite as badly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have all those lines hanging off my sail, and they just get hung up on things, and I never use them. And I've been wondering, like, should I just get rid of them, or
Yeah, I
is that
just used, sail ties, which is a bit of a fumble because you got to, get them through the eyes and you're working on the boom, which isn't always where you want to work, especially not in big conditions. But for me, it was just the easiest. Put the sail ties through the eyes and tie it up nice and neatly, and then afterwards pull them all out again.
okay? So do you do that just to that last one, or do you
No,
do that
I
to?
tie them all up. So, yeah,
Ah,
if it's maybe just the first reef or so and it's not bagging too much, then I would maybe leave it, especially in light airs. But otherwise, I would, definitely if I put a deep reef in, then I would tie all that excess stuff up because, I didn't have a boom, a stack pack or whatever you call it. So, I didn't have the sail falling into the stack. My sail would have been flapping around loose, and especially in heavy winds, I wouldn't want all that loose stuff flapping around and causing extra
mhm.
windage and perhaps also, wearing the sail down unduly.
Do you think a stack pack would be a good alternative to that? Would be better?
I think if you're cruising, I think a stack pack is a nice thing to have because it saves you going up there the whole time and putting little, sail ties through all those reefing holes. But for a race like this, I wouldn't want a stack pack because again, it's a little bit of extra windage on your boat when you might not want it. And not only that, I used the letterbox drop method to drop my Spinnaker and my Jenica and even the Code Zero. And with a stack pack, you've got that thing there that's an obstacle in your way. So I prefer just having a boom cover and taking it down, packing it away, and then it's gone and out of your way. And on a race like that, you're never going to need it again,
Mhm.
until you
Can
reach
you
the end.
can you tell us how you launch and take down your Spinnaker?
Yeah, so the launching was simple enough. I would tie the Spinnaker up with bits of pure wool, uh, and not excessively strong wool, so wool that will snap quite easy. And then, I'd launch it maybe with the wind coming at about 140, say 120, maybe 120 to 140. So I'd pull it up on the halyard. Then it would be lying, it would still be a sausage because it's been tied up with the wool. And then I'd go to the cockpit and I'd sheet in on the guy and on the sheet, and then it would fill up. So the launching was easy enough, and then the dropping of the Spinnaker, I would I'd drop it also on about 140, so I'd drop it quite far downwind, and basically I would let the guy fly completely loose. So I would have another line on the pole just to stabilize the pole so that the pole doesn't start slamming into the forestays and stuff. But I'd let the guy go completely. And then I'd have a retrieval line on the clew that was going underneath the mainsail, so between the mainsail and the boom. And then basically what happens is it falls completely into the shadow of the mainsail. And even in strong winds, you can then retrieve it quite easily on that retrieval line by the clew. And you just pull it in between the boom and the mainsail. And I would then stuff it straight into its bag. I'd have the bag sort of hooked on right at the mast. I'd shove it into the bag and then I'd throw the bag into the forepeak, and that would be me done with my Spinnaker drop.
So it sounds like you have to have your main up, flying, and full, not reefed, in order to do that. Is your main always flying full when you're flying your Spinnaker?
No, not necessarily full. You need some man. Of course, the more man you have, the easier it is to get the Spinnaker down. But I would often use a reefed man just because in light winds, for example, I'd reef the man down because I didn't want it slamming or shadowing the Spinnaker too much. And in stronger winds, I'd reef it down, just because the winds are stronger. But you do need some man. But even if you have a deeply reefed man, it's still going to have the necessary effect that you need to firstly keep the boat moving a little bit. Because of course, if your boat comes to a halt, then you've suddenly got a lot more, apparent wind. So as long as the boat's moving downwind, it's keeping your apparent wind down. So as long as you have a little bit of man for that reason, and also to form the wind shadow that's ultimately going to help you get the Spinnaker down, it's okay. So reef man works as well.
Okay, I'm just trying to picture how the spinnaker goes between the main and the boom when it's reefed? Um,
Well, again, that's why I had a loose luff, and that's why I didn't tie my reefing lines around the boom. I only tied the end reefing line, which is effectively then the clue of
mhm.
the reef down sail around the boom, and the rest of it is free. So you've got your maybe stacked up or flaked up excess sail, but I've tied it all together with sail ties. So it's not
Oh, now I
hanging around,
understand.
and you've got a little bit more friction, shall I say, when you've got a reefed main, because there's a little bit more weight sitting on it, but you've still got that free space. It's not restricted space as such
Okay, I
between
think
the. Yeah.
now I get it. So when you reef, I think you take your sail ties and put them through the reef. What are they called? The reef points or the reef hole, the holes in the sail, and
Yeah,
you tie the most aft one down around the boom, and then the rest of them you tie around the sail, but not around the boom.
exactly. Yeah.
Aha! Now I got it. Great. That's a great tip. These are all the things I wanted to get from you today. All these tips that other sailors can use. Um, yeah, because my goodness, you've gone all the way around the world, won a race in a boat very similar to the boats that we sail, that the listeners to this podcast sail.
Hmm.
How often did you hand steer?
Paul, not that often, to be honest, because the Hydrovane was doing its job. I often hand steered when I was flying the kite just because it's fun and because maybe you're slightly more effective catching little surfs or whatever. But I'd mainly do it, by way of enjoying myself and amusing myself rather than out of necessity. What I liked about the Hydrovane, I don't know what self-steering you use, but what I like about a self-steering that has its own rudder as opposed to working on a servo pendulum and on the boat's rudder is that you can steer simultaneously with the self-steering gear. So if I was flying the Spinnaker, for example, in borderline conditions where I should really be dropping it and where I wanted to be on the helm, then I would steer together with the Hydrovane because I would have lashed my helm midships with bungee cords, but I could override those bungee cords. Obviously, it took a bit of force, but I could override them. But the good thing about that is I could steer without disengaging the Hydrovane, which meant that if I did suddenly have to intervene, I could drop the tiller and the boat would keep steering itself, and I could, go up onto the foredeck or to the mast or wherever I needed to be to, for example, drop the kite or something like that. So yeah, I would hand steer. Back to your question, I'd hand steer in relatively rough conditions or in borderline conditions where I'm flying sails and I'm over canvassed and I'm getting good speeds, but I'm actually a little bit over the limit, and it's better to hand steer.
All right, yeah, that sounds like a good technique. Yeah, I also have a Hydrovane, and I love it. When I'm offshore, it just steers the whole time, and I chose it because it doesn't have control lines that cut off half your cockpit, coming to either your tiller or your wheel. Well, yeah, it would cut off
Yeah,
both
and
sides
and
of the tiller, wouldn't it?
is yours a tiller or a wheel steering system?
A wheel.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, my boat was designed with a tiller, and the tiller head and the tiller is still there. I mean, the tiller's inside the boat; it's not attached, but the tiller head is still there.
Okay,
But somebody added a
yeah.
wheel to the boat, and every
Okay,
now and then I
and
think about going back.
is it an easy enough setup with a wheel
Yeah,
to
it works
connect?
fine. Yeah.
It's got like a clutch thing that you'd attach the lines to, or how does it work?
Um, well, I have the let's see, I have a Hydrovane, so I'm not. There aren't lines coming to my wheel. Is that what you were talking about?
Oh, sorry, yeah, that's right. So do you just lock your wheel?
I lock the wheel. Yeah, it has a
Okay,
little twisty lock, but I don't trust that.
okay,
So I also have lines that go down to cleats. So
okay.
lines that come
Oh, that
down
makes
from the
sense.
wheel, and I can cleat it on both sides. And those you can trust. The little
Yeah,
clutch, the little twisty wheel thing. Every now and then, it doesn't work. But
yeah,
yeah, I selected the Hydrovane mainly because I didn't want lines. I like to sit behind my wheel,
yeah,
and I like to be able to go around either side of it, whichever side is more convenient or safe. And I don't want to have control lines going to my wheel, making
yeah.
me have to
That
go
makes
around
sense.
one side and not the other the whole time.
Yeah, and
So
do you find with your wheel that because what I do quite a bit, if I needed a bit of extra balance, for example, if I was experiencing a bit of weather or lee helm or whatever it is, I could slightly off center my tiller just to, I could put a little bit more tension on one or the other side just to balance that out a little bit. Do you find you do that with the wheel?
you know, every time I set the Hydrovane, setting the wheel is part of that. It's
Yeah.
never just in the center.
Yeah.
It's always a little bit one way or the other. So that's
Mhm.
yeah, every single time that's part of the adjustment to the Hydrovane.
Mm.
Um, yeah, plus with the wheel, I don't really know exactly where the center is. I have a pretty good idea, but it's not as
Yeah.
obvious as when you have a tiller. It's
With
pretty
a
obvious.
tiller.
It's in the center of your cockpit. And
Yeah.
do you find so your boat is mine's a little bit bigger than yours. It's a 40-foot full keel. It weighs
Mhm.
maybe as much as 30,000 pounds when it's loaded and full. But
Okay.
I often consider going back to my tiller, and I wonder, I've heard people say, "No, no, that's a bad idea. Don't go back to the tiller. It's too much force. If for instance, if a following sea hits the rudder, it might swing the tiller and hit you, and I don't know." And I've heard people say that going in reverse in a boat that big with a full keel and a tiller is difficult. More difficult to handle the big tiller, but I miss my tiller on my previous boat, and sometimes I think
Yeah.
about going back to it. What do you think? Do you think the tiller's A-okay, or are there any issues with it
I
you
mean,
don't like?
I think it's okay. I would agree that the bigger the boat gets, the more force is on the tiller. But and there's just certain little things you need to keep in mind with the tiller. For example, going astern, if you're maneuvering in port or whatever, is not to get distracted and let it go. Not because it's going to whack you with force or anything, but just because suddenly your boat's going off course. Whereas with the wheel, I think you could probably keep two fingers on it and it still kind of holds it a little bit easier than the tiller. But generally speaking, I think it's totally doable. And as you'll know, because you've sailed a lot with tillers, this is always just a question of getting used to.
Yeah, I think steering with a tiller is much more fun. There's nothing fun
Mm.
about steering with a wheel. I mean, you're still steering a sailboat, but you can't feel the water. And
Yeah, the only thing I'd say to that is I agree. I much prefer steering with the tiller. But on occasions when I did spend hours on the tiller, like maybe a half a day or whatever, you're sitting sideways because you're not
yeah,
really dead center and you're
yeah,
looking forward. So I would
yeah. You
find
get
my neck's actually starting to strain after a while.
That's a good
That's
point. Yeah,
that's
I
the only
remember that.
down part with the tiller is maybe the neck position that your neck gets a little bit stiff after a while, but everything's a bit of a compromise at the end of the day. So
Yeah, you're right. You're right about that. Yeah, speaking of steering in reverse, I use my Hydrovane rudder now when I'm backing out of a marina.
hmm
I locked the wheel and put a little put a little tiller in my Hydrovane and steer with it, and it works much better than the boat's rudder.
oh, that's interesting. I've never tried doing that just with the Hydrovane tiller, but initially what I did the first couple of times when I was new to backing out with the Hydrovane, I would lock the Hydrovane rudder dead center and then I'd steer on the boat rudder. And I found, with a long keel boat, you've already got bad steerage going astern. And I found then it was even worse. But then I actually didn't lock the Hydrovane rudder. Instead, I got myself a long pole, like a pipe that I could put over that little tiller thing, whatever you want to call it. And then I'd tie that onto my tiller. So I'd be steering with the boat's rudder as well as the Hydrovane rudder simultaneously. And that, of course, made the world of difference.
Yeah, and that's essentially what I do. I have one hand on my wheel typically. Sometimes I lock the wheel, but typically I have one hand on my wheel and one hand on the Hydrovane tiller and
Mm,
steer with both. Because my boat doesn't,
yeah,
going in reverse, it's just as likely to go to port or to stern, regardless of what I'm doing with the wheel. It's more, it
yeah.
has more to do with which way the wind's blowing and if there's a current. And I try not to go in reverse ever. I stay away from marinas. I even go buy fuel with my dinghy in jerry cans because
Oh, right.
I
Okay.
don't even want to
Yeah.
pull up to a fuel dock and windflower.
Huh.
um,
Yeah. The joys of a long keel, eh?
yeah, yeah, it's still worth it though. Offshore,
Yeah, definitely.
I love it.
For
And
sure, definitely.
whenever I run aground, I'm always glad that I have a full keel too. That's happened a few
Mm,
times. You bump into something, you don't have to worry about breaking your keel
yeah.
off. Uh,
Yeah.
let's talk a little bit about navigation. What were there any particularly difficult places to navigate around? Like, for instance, the islands south of New Zealand, or going around Cape Horn, that whole area? Were those?
Yeah, there was a rule in the race that you have to pass north of Snares Island, which is south of Stewart Island, and there are quite a lot of rocks to the north. Well, there are at least two, breaking sort of rocks to the north of that, between that and Stewart Island. So I didn't like that rule. I would much have preferred just passing south of Snares, because you've got endless amounts of water to the south with no obstacles, but to the north there are a fair few obstacles. And the problem is it's quite a foggy place, or it can be quite a foggy place. So I was lucky that I could actually see Snares, because I passed it on a clear evening when it was visible. And fortunately I'd spotted it then, because not an hour or two later the fog pulled in really thick and you couldn't see anything anymore. Whereas if I hadn't been able to see that, that would have been a little bit scary. And then there was the next island. I forget its name now. I'm having a gap in my thoughts here, but Bounty Island. So the next island was Bounty Island, and I didn't see Bounty Island at all. So I passed it. I passed it with a safe clearance, because it was bad visibility. But I passed it, according to my calculations, quite close, and I couldn't see anything of it. So yeah,
Wow.
those places are slightly tricky because of the
that
fog.
sounds scary.
Yeah.
Going around that without a chart plot. I'm so used to having a chart plotter that it really sounds like it would be scary. It'd be hard to take a nap in conditions like that, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, because I've always had not necessarily a chart plotter, but at least a handheld GPS on any other trip I've done, and I've often switched it off. Well, I did, at least when I was practicing for the Golden Globe, but the point is I still knew it was there, so I could still have used it as a backup if I really needed to. But when you go on such a long trip and it sinks into your brain that there is no more GPS backup, you actually just kind of get used to it. It's like, okay, well, this is how it is now, so I better be vigilant, And you try and look out for other signs. I mean, obviously you have your depth sounder on, but you try and look out for other signs, like maybe a different wave pattern, which could indicate that there's been some refraction of waves off land, or the presence of birds, or whatever else, maybe the presence of seaweed, kelp and stuff drifting in the water, that could indicate that you are closing in on land. But it can be pretty scary.
So that brings up another point, that sailing without modern technology, you obviously are much more in tune to things like wave pattern, wind, birds, all the natural signs. You're basically navigating with natural means. How does that change the experience and change your mindset? Do you feel much closer to nature or something like that when you're sailing?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it certainly. Yeah, sorry. For me, it certainly had that effect, that it made me feel like it was forcing me to be more observant. Because nowadays, even if you're not necessarily sailing, but you want to go and do some outdoor activity, or go for a walk, or go and have a picnic, or whatever the case may be, we're always checking our phones to see what the weather forecast has in store. And I think back in the days, people just looked at the weather signs far more. And it was nice. For me, it was a liberating experience to say, I don't have to be staring at a screen for my backup, or for my safety, or for whatever it is. All I need to do is open my eyes and observe and try and understand the weather patterns. And the interesting thing is, irrespective of whether you've been sailing with or without GPS and modern weather forecasting, I think there are a lot of things you actually have observed and do realize, but you don't consciously have that knowledge in your head because you don't use it. But when you're forced to, it's amazing how you actually have an intuitive understanding of things, probably because of the experience that you've previously made and the unconscious observations that you've been making and storing away in your memory somewhere. So it is nice. It's a really worthy thing to try out.
Did you find yourself able to predict changes in the weather by looking at the clouds and such? Did that skill develop during the race?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in the Southern Ocean, it is quite straightforward that either you're going to be sitting in a high pressure, and if you're unlucky, you're not going to have winds or headwinds. And then, you really do see the wind filling in as the barometer starts dropping down, and you see, certain clouds preceding it, or some of the first signs often is swell coming in. I found like big, long period and sometimes very gentle swell was heralding the fact that there was a big disturbance coming up from behind, but still far away. So that would be one of the first signs. Then the next sign is the change in atmosphere in terms of clouds. And then, of course, the barometer would actually really be accurate. You'd see the barometer falling during all that time. You'd have northwesterly, and then it would start steadying out, and bang, the wind would switch west. It would stay west for just a little bit, and then it would swing right around to the southwest. And then the barometer would start filling in, and you'd get these gusty, strong winds. And that was a pattern that you would observe time and again, and that would really be quite similar. It was just a question of the intensity of the wind that you wouldn't necessarily know. Is it going to be a big one, or is it going to be a small one? How far south is the front? And then where it's a little bit trickier, I guess, to really predict what's happening in terms of the clouds is in the tropics. But even there, cloud meant wind. Absolutely zero cloud often meant, well, this is not good. This is a high. This is, maybe going to mean sitting around for a while and getting becalmed. And the same as in the doldrums, you get very used to eagerly seeking out those squall clouds that are otherwise a nuisance, but now you're just hoping and praying for them, because they're the ones that even bring you little bits of wind, that even if you can make 10 minutes of headway, it's better than nothing. So you kind of start honing in on riding out the squalls and using what wind they bring.
Does anything stand out as like the most difficult situation you were in?
Mentally, the most difficult situation was getting stuck in the doldrums, because I didn't have there was absolutely zero way to get any weather information. I could have asked a passing ship, because that was within the rules of the race, that another mariner, unassociated ship may give you any weather information that they have available, but there were no ships. And I didn't know how long I'd be stuck there. I didn't know how wide the doldrums were, and you start getting negative because I was stuck there for such a long time. You start thinking, well, I might be stuck here for another 2 months or 3 months, or who knows, So that mentally was the most challenging, where I had to sort of actively tell myself not to get negative and not, start picturing worst case scenarios of being stuck there for an even more prolonged period of time. But then, as in situations that required more immediate urgency, shall I say, I guess with storms, where you're a little bit anxious, is something going to break, or is everything going to go well, or am I going to get hit, suddenly by a big rogue wave that's going to do my boat some harm? There were definitely situations like that.
Excuse me. Gosh, my mind just went blank on me.
That's all right.
Oh yeah, there it is. I remember I had the next question in my head, and then it just completely is gone.
Just
It's back
took
now.
a sip of coffee, that's all.
Yeah, that's all I needed was a little bit more coffee. What were you doing when you got the message that Tapio's boat had sank?
Well, at that point in time, I didn't have much wind, so I think I'd just been diving to try and clear off a few of the barnacles, and other than that, I'd been fighting with the sails, trying to get them up, but then dropping them quite shortly afterwards to avoid, gear damage. And it was probably a point when I just dropped the sail and sitting around in frustration and hoping that the wind comes back, that I got the message about Tapio. And I got 3 messages in a row. So I knew something's a bit weird, because usually there's no reason why they'd send you 3 messages in a row. They'd probably just send you everything all in one message. And because I'd also previously realized that other entrants were getting messages that I hadn't been getting, I knew there'd been a delay over something. So I read the 3 messages, and the first one said Tapio's EPIRB has gone off. The second one had said something about it's confirmed that Tapio's boat has sunk, and then the third one said he's safe and in his life raft, and he's giving us updates and everything's kind of stable.
And at what point did you realize you were going to be the one to rescue him?
Well, I immediately, the moment I got those messages, I assumed that I'm probably the closest one to him, because we were basically at the Cape Town photo gate at the same time. So I immediately called them and I said, is there anything I can do to help, on sat phone? And Seb said to me, yes, you're the closest person to him. Here's his position. Go immediately to his assistance.
And then at that point, did you open your grab bag and turn on the GPS and start the engine and all that?
Immediately. For me, that was kind of, it was a shift of focus completely from really, I'm in a race and I need to stick to the rules. And GPS is like the forbidden word, and also using the engine. So that's the first thing I did is I got my GPS out, I switched it on, I put in his position, and I was still becalmed. So I switched on my engine immediately and I motored it relatively high but sustainable revs, because now it was a question of getting to him as quickly as possible.
So it sounds like there was no debate. I mean, I can picture how, no matter how much you like the guy and how much you think you need to rescue him, I can picture there might be some bit of debate in your head about, oh, this is a race. It's like a slow transition from one to the other. But it sounds like it was a very quick transition from it's a race to this is a rescue and the race doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah, it was very quick. I think it was almost as though I'd forgotten the race. Like the race was secondary or non-existent in that moment. For me, it was really about get to him as quickly as possible. However, it was still weird breaking that seal, and then switching the engine on and just freely motoring, where I had to say to myself, this is not a question about are you delving into your 25 liters of permitted fuel for the race anymore. It was just open throttle and get to him. And so there were those. I think it wasn't a question of do I feel like doing this, or is it going to be bad for me in terms of the race, more as the transition from rules that are very fixed in your head that you may not break to yes, but now you not only may you break them, but you must break them, and this is what you have to do.
Right. And just for the listeners who might not understand the gravity of what we're talking about, opening that grab bag and turning on the GPS would either relegate you to the Chichester class or disqualify you from the race, correct? I mean,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. If it wasn't a rescue. But there was also a point in my mind where, if they had said to me, yeah, no, it's fine, rather just keep on sailing and doing your race, I'm not sure I would have wanted to anymore. Knowing that you're the closest person to someone in distress. Even if they'd said, it's fine, there's a cargo ship coming or whatever, we don't need you anymore. I would seriously have had to interrogate them a little bit and say, are you sure? Because I don't want to, be sailing away from someone who needs my help.
Yeah, exactly. The race wouldn't have any kind of, wouldn't be, good to win or to do anything in the race anymore if you realized later that you should have gone back for him,
Well, exactly. I mean, the win would mean nothing to you or anyone else if you did it at by just ignoring the fact that someone else needed you. And in fact, I was kind of upset that the tracker hadn't, transmitted the messages as quickly as they should, because I'm not really sure how long a delay it was until I actually got those messages, but it must have been the best part of 4 or 6 or more hours. And, at that time, I'm not sure if they were thinking that I was just ignoring the message because I didn't feel like, getting out of the race. But, if I'd had my way, I would have received the message when I should have without any further delays and gotten to him even quicker.
Okay. So for the next 24 hours, roughly, you motored and sailed and just did whatever you could to get there as fast as possible. And then you got to Tapio and you got into, I think, radio communication with him next. And then it sounds like you had a lot of trouble seeing his raft, which I think is a pertinent message for everyone to realize that even a big orange life raft in calm seas is difficult to see.
Well, yeah, it actually you actually get to see how small such a big orange life raft actually is. And then, yeah, I mean, Tapio could see me, I couldn't see him. So he was telling me to alter course, but I think it's very deceptive even for the person sitting on the life raft, because, you might think it's 15 or 20 or whatever degrees, but it's difficult to judge what is that person's leeway, or is there any drift that they've got going for them. So, and also I was sailing very much downwind. So in order for me to alter course, I had to jibe, which meant I'm going to alter course probably more than I want to. So I guess the better thing for me would have been to just keep following the GPS. Of course, by then, he could have drifted off the position because I wasn't, getting constant updates on his position. But yeah, it is really difficult because I couldn't see him. So I really had to go on what his verbal instruction was of, I'm 15 degrees further over to port or whatever. But then you do a sail alteration, and you've still got some degrees of leeway, and then you're not seeing him. So it's kind of like, it's almost easier to just look at the GPS and keep following that position, because at least you're seeing something on the GPS.
And how close to him were you when you finally did make visual contact?
I was closer to him than you'd expect, because the sun was right behind him. So even when he should have been visible to me, he wasn't, because I was completely blinded by the sun. And he went so far as to fire off a flare, of which I saw absolutely nothing. And I was on the radio and I was looking in the direction that he was indicating I should be looking at with respect to the sun. And he said, "Are you watching?" And I'm like, "I'm watching." He says, "I'm firing it off now." And I saw nothing. So, so again, that's why I guess we get taught to use smoke flares in the daytime, because a parachute flare like that with backlight is very difficult to see, especially when the sun's very low on the horizon.
Yeah, that's a good point, that we should all have a smoke flare in our kit that ends up in our life raft with us if we need should we end up there. Can you explain the moment of making physical contact with Tapio, and speaking to him in person and getting him onto your boat?
Yeah, I mean, I was obviously wondering what sort of mind frame he'd be in, because he'd obviously experienced quite a dramatic loss of his boat, and just managing to get onto his life raft and all that kind of thing, and drifting around out there for 24 hours. So I didn't know, how would he be, what would his mental frame of mind be. And I was really, really surprised. And he was already reassuring before I saw him, because he was making jokes and telling me about turtles and stuff drifting around next to his life raft. So I'm like, well, he's obviously in good spirits if he's enjoying the wildlife around him while he's bobbing around out there. But then it was a great relief. Like, it was really, really just a great relief to have his life raft tied securely alongside Minnehaha, and see him and talk to him and see that he's laughing and smiling and that he's fine. But I was very, very surprised, just at how positive he was. I mean, that's something that seriously hasn't gone your way, and yet you're there and you're just happy and you're grateful and you're laughing and joking, and you're celebrating life, which is something I'll never forget. It was a real lesson in positivity for me.
Yeah, it really is amazing how positive he was, and it's not simply a matter of losing a boat. Asteria to him was a boat he had refitted extensively for the previous race, in which, I'm just basically speaking to the listeners here just to give a little backstory. He sailed this boat in the 2018 race. He had problems. He had barnacles, but he completed the race and then refit her again and took off in the next Golden Globe race, and it was definitely a contender to win the race, in my mind anyway. And then all of a sudden the boat sank. And and to be able to maintain a positive attitude in a situation like that is very impressive, and a good lesson for all of us, that if something's getting you down, at least you didn't just lose your sailboat in the Southern Ocean.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's the more you get to know him, I mean, I'm sure you are getting to know him very well, what with co-writing his book. But I think you realize that is just a trademark of who he is, of his personality and of his characters, that he's an incredibly positive, incredibly cheerful, just good human being,
He is, exactly. I think he sort of made the decision mentally that he's already been through in his life, the sad times, and nothing else is going to be sad anymore. He's just going to be happy.
Yeah.
And
a very cool person, very admirable person.
Absolutely. How did the rescue change the race? The rest of the blah blah blah. Let me start over. Did the rescue change the rest of the race for you in any way? change your mindset or anything about the race?
Not particularly. Once he'd left and been transferred over to the cargo ship, it took a little bit of like processing the whole experience. And then by the next morning, it's like, well, that's it. I've sealed my GPS back into the grab bag. I've filmed it and photographed and everything, but I'm really paranoid that people are going to think I carried on using the GPS. And I'm back to the way things were before. So the next morning, it was just like, no, I've kept on sailing. And it didn't add any extra element of fear. Like, I wasn't thinking, well, shit, if it could, I wasn't thinking if that could happen to Tapio, it could happen to me. But one of the things I did do was move my grab bags to a more accessible place, because I had actually stowed them in the quarter berth, which is a good place because it's right next to the companionway. So it is kind of where you can grab them and exit the boat. But they'd kind of started being wedged under all sorts of other stuff that had landed up there as well. So the first thing I did was haul all that stuff to the top and make sure that it really is in a position that I can just grab it and get up onto the deck with it. And for the rest, I didn't, I felt pretty sad. I felt really down that Tapio wasn't in the race anymore, but it was back to racing.
When you rescued him, did you think he was going to be on your boat all the way to Hobart?
No, I didn't. I thought at max he'll be on my boat for maybe a few hours, because they were really good at keeping me updated about what was happening. So they regularly sent an update on his position, because obviously he was drifting, and they also kept on updating me on the cargo ship that was simultaneously diverted to his assistance. So I knew that there was a ship coming, and that he'd unlikely be on my boat right up until Hobart.
Can you describe a beautiful moment during the race, one of your favorite moments?
Well, maybe not beautiful, but a moment certainly filled with incredible joy and relief and a whole mix of emotions was when he actually stepped aboard Minnehaha. There's this big fin, and I just gave him a big hug, and I'm like, I'm so glad you're safe. So that was a very poignant moment. And then there were a few other really amazing moments. Just off Cape Town, I was becalmed that night. That's when Tapio got offshore and got ahead of me, and I was drifting closer inshore, and I was frustrated because I wanted to move, but it was one of the most beautiful wildlife experiences I've ever had, because the humpbacks were surfacing right next to the boat. In fact, if I'd been lying on the deck and I'd had my head and my shoulders underneath the bottom guardrail reaching down to the water, I would almost have been able to touch them. That's how close they were. And the next morning, they were still with me, and there were seals and dolphins. I had 3 different species, playing around the boat, coming very close to the boat out of curiosity. So in terms of wildlife, that was absolutely amazing. Another really beautiful experience was just off Hobart or Tasmania, when I woke up at like 2 a.m. local ship's time, and I saw the sky was really bright, and I was thinking, what's going on? Is it later than I thought it was? And then I thought, no, because the lights are coming from the south and not from the east, so it's not dawn light. And I realized it's actually the southern lights that I'm looking at. It was just white. Wow. It wasn't the green and the red southern lights, but it was a white, slightly greenish light, and it looked like rays shining out from the bottom of the horizon, and they were moving. So that was really, really special to see that, when I realized what I was actually looking at. And then, of course, getting around the Horn was a very, memorable moment, because you're relieved that you actually found the Horn. You're relieved that you're passing the Horn. You're happy that you're now on your way up north again. It's just, kind of a dream come true to sail around the Horn from the Pacific into the Atlantic Ocean. And then, of course, arriving was also a very, very special moment. So, yeah.
And what was the most fun sailing conditions or moment?
The very most fun, I'll say, it was quite adrenaline-filled sailing, but it was in the Southern Ocean, in the Southern Pacific. And I don't know exactly what wind speeds I had, because obviously I didn't have an anemometer. And sometimes I think it's better, because you can't really tell. I find above 35, 40 knots, everything's just windy. It's hard then to say, am I now in 45 or 50 or plus knots, because it's anyway windy. But whatever the case is, it was definitely it was into the 40s, I would say, at least. And I had reefed those twin working Yankees down to the minimum that I could. And the boat was just flying along. Like, I was really doing something I shouldn't have, because I don't think it's normal to have a boat going at those speeds. But, Minnehaha was shooting like a rooster tail off her stern. That's how fast she was going. And again, I didn't have a GPS to really see the actual speeds, but it was very fast, and it was very fun, and it was very exciting. And I was at the tiller simultaneously helming with the Hydrovane, and, my heart was racing, but like half with joy, half with adrenaline, just because she was moving so incredibly well.
Wow, that sounds fantastic.
Yeah, it was sure fun.
So, do you have any future plans that you can share with us? Do you intend to continue offshore racing?
Paul, I'm not sure, because first thing is I have to decide if I want to and can find a way to keep Minnehaha. Because if I do keep her, then I've got debt on her, and that determines that I have to find a way to pay that debt off. Offshore racing, I don't know, to be honest. I don't know if right now I would feel like starting a whole new campaign for offshore racing, because for me it was a long and intense project with the refit, with getting stuck with COVID and all that sort of stuff on the other side of the world. And I'm actually happy to just be alone during that time.
Oh, you're back.
Yeah, so my direct plans, I'm not saying never and I'm not saying no, but that my direct plan isn't to start another campaign for offshore racing. My direct plan is to just be closer to home, maybe digest the experience a little bit, and yeah, try and do some work around my home waters.
All right. Very good. Yeah, I mean, for me, I think if I did that race, I would feel like, okay, I've done it. Like, that's my fill. I don't need to do any more, long, ambitious projects, sailing.
Yeah, and the other thing is, for me, it was like the ultimate sort of challenge in sailing. And now I feel, in a way, it's hard to beat.
Yeah.
What do I do next that tops the GGR? So, but yeah, who knows? I mean, I kind of like being in the in-between phase where you don't exactly know what you're going to do next, because it's a good space to reinvent yourself.
Any desire to just cruise for fun, to sail to interesting places, like come down to Panama, for instance?
Yeah, sure. That would definitely interest me. Or go and check out Polynesian islands or something like that. And if I had no debt and I had nothing holding me back home here, which at this stage I do have a little, I've got some responsibilities here. I would probably want to sail with Minnehaha through the Northwest Passage and then go and check out Alaska or something like that.
Oh, wow. You like those cold places, don't you? Is it the cold, or is it the remoteness, the nature that you like?
Yeah, it's funny. I used to like the cold places, but the older I get, the more I like the warm, because I love swimming. I love being in the water. So that's, of course, the joy of being in a place that's really warm. But I love the remoteness and the wildness of the cold places. And I feel the cold like keeps me a little bit more on my toes, like it keeps me awake. So I guess I like them for the challenge aspect of it.
All right. Yeah, I mean, we've already talked about this, but I really enjoyed the remote Newfoundland experience, but I did not like the cold part of it at all.
Yeah. Again, everything lands up being a bit of a compromise.
For the most part, yeah, I'm pretty happy where I am now, down here in the Western Caribbean.
Oh wow, well, I can imagine it's divine.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah. All right. Well, stay on the line after we say goodbye for just a minute, please.
Sure.
But let's go ahead. Well, Kirsten, it's been so much fun talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on to the podcast and giving us this hour of your time.
Sure. It's been fun. Thank you.